the methods and techniques for immediate response. In this lecture, your professor is Tom Webb. Tom earned his Th.M, his Master's of Theology from Dallas Theological Seminary. He's a trained trainer in CISM, Critical Incident Stress Management. Tom's led various trainings for the American Association of Christian Counselors through the years, come to really appreciate his expertise and, by the way, his delivery. Tom's a very knowledgeable man, understands the Word of God, and really has a passion for responding to crises. In this particular course, you're going to look at the basic models of crisis intervention. You're going to look at specifically different CISM, Critical Incident Stress Management interventions. He's going to be looking at how do you respond across contexts, workplace, dealing at church, family, communities. He's going to look at the concept and benefit of crisis intervention teams, mobilizing those who could respond as first responders. He's also going to talk about biblical issues, including a crisis of faith, getting you started in that area. Crisis intervention, I'm sure you're learning, is a pretty challenging field, but a very rewarding one. Let's go now to Tom Webb.
When a natural disaster or tragic accident occurs, killing many and causing property damage, or a violent crime or terrorist act is perpetrated, many believers find themselves stunned, wondering, how can I provide God's love and assistance to those who have been so greatly overwhelmed and in such despair? Today, in our time together, we'll be looking at some key issues and concepts in a very practical way of responding in these times. The system of critical incident stress management, as developed by the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation, offers a very practical way for believers to be able to share one another's burdens and show the love of Christ to those who are hurting in the time of a great crisis. As we begin our time, it's important that we cover some material that Jennifer had previously covered, just as by way of a foundation. And you'll see on your screen, there are some definitions of some important words that we want to make sure you have a firm understanding of. First of all, the field of crisis intervention covers two large categories. The first is that which focuses on material aid. At the times of disasters, people have a need for food, shelter, and clothing, and to fill out insurance forms. These are all very important matters. Equally as important is the part of crisis intervention that is people-focused. That part of crisis intervention that is people-focused is called critical incident stress management. The word crisis commonly is used in two ways. Popularly, it's often referred to as that which caused the traumatic experience, or the traumatic stress and impairment that people experience. But in our work and in the field of critical incident stress management, the term crisis applies to that state of impairment that people experience after having been a part of or witnessing a traumatic event. People often find themselves suffering symptoms physically, cognitively, emotionally, behaviorally, and spiritually. So when we talk about people being in crisis, we're talking about them being in a state of impairment. A critical incident refers to any event that causes an individual to feel overwhelmed and be impaired in their functioning, both horizontally and vertically. People will find that they will experience disruption in their own personal orientation as well as in their relationship functioning. And so that's why it's so important that we learn about how to give aid and assistance in these times of need, to bear one another's burden in a very effective manner. On your screen, you'll be viewing an overview chart of the field of critical incident stress management. This chart that we're looking at shows a variety of takeoffs on a specific crisis intervention called critical incident stress debriefing. In the first column on the left, you will see the model of critical incident stress debriefing as developed by Dr. Jeff Mitchell with the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation. The model has 7 steps, and by other agencies and individuals over time, this model was taken off, and there have been other variations. For example, the psychological debriefing model has 7 steps that correlate roughly to the CISD model of the ICISF. And then NOVA and the Red Cross also use a model which have shorter steps, but focus on a common theme and purpose. That is, these interventions are designed to take place not immediately, but rather they're often a tertiary intervention that is used after people have been addressed and spoken to individually, and some time has passed, and people are assessed regarding their state of impairment. So today we'll primarily be looking at the critical incident stress debriefing. The common theme that each of these interventions have is that they meet the individual where they're at and begin the conversation on the cognitive level. As trust develops within the group process, the discussion moves towards talking about the individual's emotional reactions, and then after that discussion has reached a sense of completion, the design is to move back towards the cognitive as people are encouraged to develop specific coping strategies and given encouragement and hope for their re-entry back into relationships after the group is finished. The most effective means in crisis intervention is to use a system that has several tools in the toolbox and that is sensitive in its timing to various phases that people reach at different points along the crisis spectrum. There was a quote that I'd like to read by Dr. Hayden Duggan. He's the International Association of the Fire Chiefs Association, and he made this statement in September 1, 2002. He said the merits of debriefing, that is, early intervention, provide certain constants. The most important effective methods for mitigating the effects of exposure to trauma are those which will keep our people healthy and in service. Those are ones in which we use early intervention and are multimodal, that is, have many tools in the toolbox, and multi-component. That is, they use different active ingredients, and these components are used at the appropriate time with the right group. As we go through this study, it's important for you to recognize we'll be covering very important concepts and terms. But in order to be adequately equipped to make these interventions that we'll be talking about, it's very important that you seek out through the American Association of Christian Counselors and take the critical incident stress management courses that would be offered in your area of the country. Because just this video will not be enough to equip you to make the actual interventions. The International Critical Incident Stress Foundation has been recognized by the United Nations and many other federal, state, and local agencies in its model. And it presents a way for believers to effectively show the love of Christ, not only to people one-on-one, but also in selected groups of individuals who need further help. You will see on your screen that there is a chart that will show the different strategies, different interventions that we have available. And I'd like to take a moment to talk to you about these several interventions in an overview fashion. First of all, there's things for you to do prior to an event even occurring. It's called pre-incident planning and preparation. Prior to an event occurring, it's important for you to take an assessment of who your neighbors are. For example, in your neighborhood, it may be important that you have on your response team people who speak the language group of the community that you are in. So it may be that you have a large group of people who are Spanish speaking, and it's important that someone on your team knows Spanish as well as English or other language groups that are prevalent in your area. It's also good to know resources that are available, community groups such as churches, as well as the Red Cross and the Salvation Army, and to make contact with these groups prior to an event occurring so that when something does happen, you are able to reach out and ascertain and get help in a very timely fashion. When a traumatic event occurs, it's important that you don't jump up and immediately go do something. First of all, we want to pause and assess the situation. A critical incident is much like Baskin & Robbins ice cream. It comes in 31 different flavors, these critical incidents. And so it's important that you know that the nature of a fire or flood will flavor and characterize what your response is going to be. For example, one of the practical ways to help show the love of God to others after a flood is to help them de-mud their house. And that takes some prior planning before you can implement that. So it's good to make those assessments early before an incident occurs, and then when an incident occurs, determine what type of event has occurred, how severe is the event, how many people were injured, what were the extent of the deaths, how long is the event going to be lasting, or did it just like a car accident happen and then you're dealing with the aftermath. This will help you strategically plan and choose what type of intervention to do next. About 80% of the time, you will be making a one-on-one or individual intervention. In our training classes, we provide a model for interviewing people who have been impacted by a traumatic event, in which we're able to help them address the symptoms that they're experiencing and help restore their functioning. This model teaches you how to listen to a person's speech, pay attention to the pulse of their emotion, take note of their appearance. Sometimes people who have blood splattered on them, that's a clue that they have been very close to the event when it occurred. Their activity level, whether they're hyper or withdrawn or lethargic, and their alertness, the thoughts. These are all categories in which we look as we're paying attention to individuals in our conversations with them to gain an idea of how they've been affected physically, cognitively, emotionally, behaviorally, and spiritually. The next set of interventions after talking with individuals one-on-one is a series of group interventions that are designed to address large or small groups depending on the nature of the event that occurs. For large disasters, demobilizations is a tool, as you'll see on your screen, that is often used with emergency service workers. This tool is designed to help people gain a measure of recovery and hope as they continue on working day after day. A respite center is also set up at large-scale disasters to help workers just physically address their needs for food, water, and rest. Another large group tool that we commonly use is called a crisis management brief. Crisis management briefs are very good to use with churches or schools or large groups of people, particularly after an event where rumor control is needed. For example, after a shooting at a local high school or college campus, it would be good to gather together the next day, parents, teachers, students, and staff of the school, to be able to pass on to them exactly what occurred, what the latest report is with regard to the injuries, or unfortunately who may have died in this, so that the truth is known and that greater chaos is not caused by just rumors and lies that are facilitated. Then the crisis management brief provides a place to talk about what people might experience having gone through this event, and that people learn that they may be impaired physically and spiritually, as well as having dealt with a roller coaster ride of emotions that they've had from being involved in the event. Finally, this event gives a chance for the team to inspire hope in individuals after the conclusion, and they can again talk with people on a one-on-one basis. The crisis management brief works well with large and small groups, so it can be used with a small group within a church or in a military setting with a squad of soldiers or Marines, and is a very, very timely thing to halt the symptoms of traumatic stress from getting worse and debilitation from the event getting worse. The other tools in the toolbox, one is defusing and the other is debriefing. The defusing is a time-sensitive tool in which people need to be selectively screened based on their common experience of the event and the level of symptoms. You don't want to place highly agitated individuals in a group response or group intervention because they may disrupt the flow of the group process. So it's important to screen them. The defusing is best used with a small group of individuals shortly after the event has occurred, from 12 hours up to 12 hours afterwards. The group crisis debriefing process, CISD, Critical Incident Stress Debriefing, is a tool that is used to address the full range of impairment caused by a crisis, particularly focusing on the behavioral, the impairment with relationships with family and friends, and vertically in relationships with God. It takes time for these symptoms to develop, and so you have to be sensitive to each culture as to exactly when to apply this tool. The other tools that we have in the toolbox that I'll just briefly mention that you'll see on your screen are family crisis intervention, as well as organizational and community consultation, and pastoral or spiritual crisis intervention. Each of these tools in the toolbox necessitate a need for follow-up. So it's important that after you do an intervention that you check back in the next day or two or week to see how people are doing and to provide further encouragement and access to further care if they so need. Spiritual crisis intervention is very, very important and can be best accomplished in the community through the local church. Building a critical incident stress management team in a community is a great challenge. It involves the task of identifying members that would be interested in this process, and then providing appropriate training in critical incident stress management. But in addition to providing the training and motivated members, you also have to have a business plan, a way of supporting the team to be able to provide equipment that they need, identification that they need, and to get them to the places where they need to go in times of a critical incident. The great benefit for building a team within a church setting is that it gives you a structured way to connect with your local community. Critical incident stress management teams that have been registered with the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation and the American Association of Christian Counselors have access and a means to connect with first responders and to get beyond the yellow tape and into the situation where the need is most needed. The benefits are great. You get in a structured way to provide the love of God and to bear the burdens of many in a time of great crisis in their lives. These relationships often lead to the opportunity for further sharing of the gospel later. But in a time like this, it's important to provide a practical way of showing God's love, and use of these tools in the toolbox certainly do. It's very important that in doing this work, of bearing one another's burdens, to know who you are as a crisis interventionist. In my classes that I teach with the American Association of Christian Counselors, I often ask my students who the identity and role is of a police officer, firefighter, and emergency medical technician. And the students are always able to give me the answers. The firefighter arrives in a fire truck and pulls out a fire hose when he arrives on the scene, and the police officer is there to keep the peace and often has a weapon with him. The emergency medical technicians arrive in an ambulance. But when the question arises, well, what vehicle does the pastoral crisis or spiritual crisis intervention arrive in? People have a question mark on their face. Often the answer is a Pinto. But it's important to recognize that we, as spiritual crisis interventionists, are ambassadors of Christ. This is foundational to who we are. And our purpose is to provide a way not only to address the behavioral symptoms where there's impairment in functioning with family and friends, but also in the impairment that's developed in one's spiritual relationship with God. So there's a vertical as well as a horizontal aspect to our work. One of the things that I think is very powerful to understand that as an ambassador of God, we bring a special presence into that moment. When I was on active duty with the Navy and the President of the United States was announced to come aboard the ship, it gave an illustration for me to use to give the significance of what it means to be an ambassador of God. When the President was piped aboard a Navy ship, bells and whistles were rang and played, ruffles and flourishes were played, and an announcement was made. But the announcement didn't say the Commander-in-Chief arriving, nor did it say the President of the United States arriving. Rather, what was said, the United States of America arriving. The United States of America arriving. The person represented the country. And you and I, in the same way, represent the true and living God. And that's who we are and who we represent as we address individuals who have been overwhelmed by the experience of a natural disaster or some other traumatic event in their lives. we represent the true and living God and bring a hope that is very special and crucial to their needs in this time. David wrote some words in Psalm 40 that are very instructive about what it is like for us as spiritual crisis interventionists, as ambassadors of God. He wrote these words. He said, "I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me and he heard my cry. He brought me up out of the pit of destruction, out of the miry clay, and he set my feet firmly upon a rock, making my footsteps firm. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to my God. Many will see and will trust in God." When we meet an individual in a state of crisis, they're literally in a pit of destruction. Their way has become dark, and their idea of who God is has faded. And we have a very unique opportunity to show them the love of God through our time of talking with them. There's an old joke that you've probably heard before about the man who was on his roof praying to be saved from the great flood. He turned away a rowboat, and then a little later, as the water were higher and he was praying fervently, he turned away a speedboat, saying that the Lord was going to save him. Finally, he turned away a helicopter that had dropped down a rope to him as he was on top of his TV antenna on top of the house. A few minutes later, very upset and distressed, he entered in through the gates of heaven and confronted the Lord and asked him, "Lord, why didn't you save me?" Well, the Lord, as you know, replied to him, "Man, what did you want? I sent you the rowboat and the motorboat and the helicopter." The point is that you and I get the privilege of being the person in the rowboat. People aren't aware of where God is at, but they will have the opportunity to experience His love and grace through our lives as we touch the individuals that we are with. The pit of destruction is a dark and a scary place, and therefore it requires that we be prepared to enter in. That's why training is so very, very crucial to this process. In our time together, what I'd like to do is to talk about the differences between hearing an individual's cry of distress and them actually being in a state of a crisis of faith. First, as you'll see on your screen, the spiritual cry of distress is something that individuals express almost immediately after a traumatic event has occurred. Why, God, did you let this happen? How could you let my buddy die? Why, Lord, did you let our house be wiped out by the fire? In these times of urgent and painful need that people experience, the cry is very intense. And without a firm grounding, one is often washed away by the undercurrent of the emotion that is expressed. So it's important to recognize that immediately after an event, people may cry out fervently to God to express their innermost pain and sorrow and lack of hope in the moment. It's very important to recognize that in this process, individuals will be in a state where they are experiencing disorientation and shock. The time has just been recent from the event occurring. And people are primarily focused on their own condition of being dazed and they can't hardly believe that this has happened. For the individual in this moment, it's important to be able to help to restore their functioning physically, cognitively, and emotionally. Not enough time has elapsed for them to be able to experience impairment behaviorally or spiritually in their relationships with family and friends, and vertically in their relationship with God. So it's important to hear the cry of distress of the individual and to give them the opportunity of expressing their deep despair without trying to avoid or dodge or quickly put a Band-Aid over what they are experiencing. The best way in which to connect with an individual who is experiencing this traumatic stress and expressing their heartfelt need for God is to be able to paraphrase back to them what you've heard them express. It's important in this process to pay attention to the person's appearance, their nonverbal communications, but also to pay attention to where they are in terms of the emotion that is being expressed. Internally, on our radar screens, we have the ability to focus on what emotion is getting evoked within us. Commonly, that is what an individual is trying to communicate. So by being aware of that emotion that is being stirred up within inside us, we can effectively address what the individual is experiencing. On your screen, you will see that there's a slide that talks about what it is like for a person who is experiencing a crisis of faith. Time has elapsed from the critical incident. Some days have gone by, and people have experienced difficulties in their relationships with family and friends, and particularly vertically in their relationship with God. You might hear an individual talk to you about how difficult it is for them to pray. God just doesn't seem to be present. He doesn't seem to hear when I cry out. I think I'm just going to give up. These words are very, very powerful. And sometimes people will ask of you, as they maybe had expressed days before, the same question. Why did God let my buddy die? How could God let us be wiped out in this horrible fire? What will we do? In this situation, people have found themselves withdrawing from their family and friends. They haven't been going to church like they had normally done, and instead they have just drifted away. It's important in these times for the spiritual crisis interventionist, God's ambassador, to step into the pit of destruction with the individual that God has brought across our paths and who's given us the privilege to talk with them about these deep matters that are on their hearts in order to provide a word of encouragement. Primary way of doing that is to hear that person's cry of distress, their state of being in a crisis of faith, where they find that they're almost ready to give up because they don't know where God is. At that point in time, it's very important for you to remember who you are. You're God's ambassador. You're there to show His love and grace, to hear that person's cry without trying to duck or dodge, but to validate what they've expressed and to bear their burden. People want someone to know what it is they're experiencing. In our training classes, we teach people how to effectively identify the emotion that is being expressed and to paraphrase that back to the individual so that they know that we get where they're coming from. As people have experienced great loss, we can help them find hope to be able to regain functioning. There was a little boy who was standing with his parents, and they were watching their house burn down. A reporter came up to the young boy and he asked a question. He was trying to get a news story, and he made a comment to the boy and he said, "Gee, it looks like you don't have a home anymore." The little boy was very quick to respond, and he said, "Well, we still have a home. We just don't have a house to put it in." The little boy had recognized the value of the relationships with his mom and dad, and it wasn't the physical building that mattered, but it was the relationships that were significant and that were important. And so in this process of addressing people's spiritual needs, it's important that we be able to impart hope to them by hearing their spiritual cry and being able to provide that hope by being present with them and giving them some practical ways of dealing with that which is before them. At this point, I'd like to take the time to illustrate through a role play what we would like to do in terms of responding to a spiritual cry of distress. In this role play, Jennifer and I will be illustrating how to assess and respond to a spiritual cry of distress. Jennifer's husband has just been killed in Iraq. She's a wife of a Marine. I'm her local pastor, and she just learned yesterday of this news and had been invited to come over to the house to speak with her. Jennifer, I'm so sorry to hear this news about John's death. I got here just as quick as I could.
Thank you, Pastor Tom. Thank you for coming. I just, I still can't believe it.
It is overwhelming. Tell me, do you know how John died?
Yeah. I guess it was an explosion. I don't even know what they told me at this point. I don't seem to be able to remember anything. I don't understand why God let him die. I knew it was going to be dangerous, but I thought that he would be okay. We just prayed, and I just don't understand.
Well, this news is such a terrible shock. And I can see that this has just crushed your spirit and broken your heart. And there's no good answers at this point as to why.
He was just supposed to be home in 2 months. It was our 8th anniversary.
Oh, wow.
I haven't even told the girls. I don't know what to say.
Well, I'll be there to be with you to tell the news that their daddy has died. And I'm certain that they will be as deeply hurt as you. But I want you to know that we as your church family will walk through this dark time with you. There's just so much that's unknown, and it just seems so hard to believe. I mean, it's like you, I was looking forward to that day. I remember your wedding ceremony, and what a joyous day that was.
I just can't believe he's gone. And I don't understand.
In this role play, Jennifer has just learned of the news, and you saw the symptoms physically, cognitively, and emotionally of how she was impacted. And at this point, as an ambassador of God, our mission is to hear and validate her cry and to be with her through this very dark time. In this video role play, Jennifer and I want to illustrate the signs and symptoms of a person experiencing a crisis of faith and how to connect with the individual at that point to help bear their burden and to be an ambassador of God to them at that point. Jennifer, I'm glad you could come in today. I know it's been now, nearly a month since the funeral and John's burial. Tell me, what brings you into the office today?
Pastor Tom, first I just want to thank you. You've been there for me. You've been so good, but it's just been such a struggle. I know the girls are upset, but I'm having so much trouble with them at home. Getting them to go to bed on time or to focus, and maybe it's because I'm not able to really be there for them the way I want to be. It's just been so hard. And I know you're aware that I haven't been coming to services for the last couple of weeks.
Yes.
And honestly, it's hard for me on a couple of different levels. One, people just don't know what to say to me. It seems like everybody's avoiding me. They don't want to even talk to me. It seems like they see me coming and go the other way. There are a few people who will say they're sorry, but I know they just probably don't know what to say to me. But I just don't feel welcome anymore by a lot of people. And to be honest with you, I'm having a very hard time praying or even sitting through services. I still am I'm so angry that John's gone. I don't know how to pray to God. I don't even know that I want to talk to him about this. I don't know how to be a Christian anymore.
Jennifer, it seems to me that you've found challenges that are most difficult on every front, at home with the kids, at work, and even with our own church members. John's absence has radically changed your world, and not for the good.
No. I definitely don't want to go to our Sunday school class and see all those other couples. I'm not a couple anymore.
One of the most difficult things at this point is making a transition, and there's no script that's been written. And that's the difficult thing. Each day is a new day without John. And for the next year, there won't be any repeats of a day. Each day will be literally a new challenge. But I want you to know that this time period that they're going through, demands a great deal of energy. You have the task now of redefining who you are. And Jennifer, that's going to take time. But I want you to know that I'll be available to be here, because I think it's important that you have an ear to pour out these hurts, because you had close friends in the Sunday school class, and now it's, from what I've heard you say, you're ostracized almost.
And maybe it's as much me as them. I just don't feel comfortable around them anymore. It's just so hard.
Well, that was a setting in which you enjoyed much joy, but it was John and you as a couple.
And even when he was gone, it was always, all we talked about was when he was coming home and how he was doing. I don't think they know what to say to me anymore, and I don't know what to say to them either.
In this videotape, you've heard Jennifer talk about the horizontal difficulties that she's had in relationship with her children, family, and friends, and also in her relationship with God. As an ambassador of Christ, I've tried to be present to hear her expression of her distress, because it's truly impacted her relationship with God. Hopefully, over the coming days and months, as I sustain a relationship with her, she'll once again be able to have a more present awareness of God's work and being in her life. But until then, it's important to be a faithful ambassador of God and to show His love and grace each day. In this role play, Tim is a member of my church. A tornado has just struck the town, wiping out his home, and we want to illustrate in a conversation that occurs just the day after the storm his spiritual cry of distress, and how as an ambassador of God you can intervene to promote hope and to bear Tim's burden. Tim, it's good to see you. It's been just a horrible storm. Tell me, I haven't been out. What's happened over your way?
I first want to thank you for taking time to see me. I know you've had a lot of people coming to see you, Pastor. But my way, I don't really know how much I can talk about it because I still can't really make sense of it. You know how long I've lived here. My whole family's from the area, born and raised here, and really thought the house that I lived in would be the house that I would live in until I got old. Oh. And it's gone. Pretty much everything that I've ever had and worked hard to own, and possessions. You always taught us possessions aren't who we are, but when you work hard and you have things and you see it all gone in an instant, I guess I'm here today because I just don't have any way of making sense of this. I love God. You know I love God. And I don't understand how this would be allowed to happen to my life. I've checked it, Pastor. I've done inventory since the storm, and I don't know what I've done to bring this on, but I'm very concerned about why God would do this to me. God is love. You taught us that. We serve a loving God, and everything I have is now laying in ruins. My entire street is gone. Not only me, I'm not just being selfish, people that I love all around me. Some lived, some didn't, but everything that was on our street has just been flattened.
Tim, I know that you love the Lord, but it seems that you have just suffered a tremendous loss. This house has been in your family for at least 2 generations. And not only did you lose your home, but it sounds like your neighborhood as well.
That's true. Well, I mean, it's just 100% true. Everything, the landmarks that I grew up, places where I would ride a bike, places where I would stop off to get something to drink from a neighbor or just to go in and see a friend, all that's gone. There's nothing left. Even the tree house, we had that big tree house back in the backyard. Oh. That tree's gone. The tree, I don't know where it is, but it's gone. And Granddaddy's old Ford pickup that was basically a collector's item. There's just nothing left of it. And I just don't understand it. I need to make sense of it, and I'm angry. And I'll be honest with you, I'm angry and I'm hurt with God.
Well, Tim, this is the most distressing time. Your house and household has been ravaged, just strewn all over. And right now, it's important that you cry out to God and let Him know. I'm glad that you came here to express just how distressing and angering this is to have this loss. Because God wants to hear where you're at. Tim, I don't know what's going to lie ahead in the next coming days. Rebuilding is going to be long and hard. But I'm thankful that we made a start today to be able to talk with one another and walk down this pathway together. It was very tempting in this role play to want to respond with a theological answer to Tim. Most importantly, at this point in time, was to deal with the spiritual and emotional impact of devastation and loss that he's had, and validate that as God's ambassador, so that Tim knew that through me being an ambassador of God, that he did have God's ear, and hopefully gains a sense of comfort from that. Not everything can be resolved in the moment. This is something that will take many days to work through and resolve. In this role play, 30 days have passed since the tornado has struck the town and Tim's house has been destroyed. And now he's experiencing difficulty in his relationship with family and friends, and also in his relationship with God. Tim, it's good to see you again. How you doing today?
Well, I got to say, much better. Every time I talk to you, I feel like I am better. And I want to thank you for that. It's meant a lot to me that you've taken time for me to try to help me make sense of, the word that comes to mind is just mayhem that my life has seemingly become since that fateful day when the tornado hit. But that means a lot to me, and I thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I do have to tell you, though, I don't know how you're going to feel about this. You might be disappointed in me, but you know I love the Lord with all my heart. But I feel like I can't even talk to him anymore because of the stress in my life after the fact. I mean, I should be thankful, Pastor. I'm in some temporary housing that's being provided by an agency, and I never thought I'd have to say that.
Yeah.
I actually got some clothes in a closet, you know, that were allotted to me. And I'm blessed. I'm alive. I didn't break a bone. I didn't injure myself. I can, you know, move around. I got a car provided for by a friend here in the church. But why am I still angry at God if these things are starting to happen good? And let me draw one more picture for you. How would you like to walk on a brick wall that was part of your house and understand that one of your neighbors is missing, only to find out the rescue team pulled the wall up and your neighbor was found dead underneath the wall of my own house? My house collapsed on my 64-year-old neighbor taking her life in the storm, and I didn't even know it for 3 days. So I'm angry with God still, and I thought that would be resolved by now.
You know, Tim, this has been most difficult days, and I can see that this anger is just boiling up in your life and not let you having any peace or rest at all. And it was particularly tragic about your neighbor. I too was shocked. You know, she was just trying to escape the storm and the wall fell on her.
It says she was just trying to get to my house, and she thought my house was the safe house, and obviously it wasn't. So,
you know, Tim, I'm really glad that you keep coming to visit with me. I don't know if you have read the Old Testament much, but you remind me of a prophet. In 1 Kings, the prophet Elijah was a great prophet of God. And he had just done great things for the Lord in helping show the vanity of idol worship, and actually had saw to it that many prophets for idols were destroyed. But then, all of a sudden, when his life was threatened by an evil king and queen, he took off and ran. And he found himself in the desert, and all he could do is to cry out to God, saying, "Take my life, for I'm alone. What's the use of going on?" God was there to meet Elijah in the desert. And I'm confident that he'll be there to meet you as well.
thank you.
The time that we're going through is difficult. And over the coming days, we have to redefine who we are as neighbors, because we're rebuilding houses. But I'm confident that through this period, just like God restored Elijah, He'll restore you. Let's pray together.
Thank you, Pastor. I needed that hope today. Thank you.
You're welcome. To summarize and to illustrate what we've talked about in this section, I'd like to use 3 examples of how I was able to be an ambassador of God to people who have found themselves overwhelmed by a traumatic event. The first illustration I'd like to talk with you about was a time when I was a Navy chaplain aboard Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton. I was the chaplain for the security battalion, which meant I was the chaplain of the military police, the civilian firefighters, and all of the staff at the brig. One afternoon on Camp Pendleton, one of our Marines was driving a 5-ton vehicle along a road in the hills of Camp Pendleton that were curvy and windy. He was going a little too fast, and unfortunately, he didn't make the curve. He and his companion that was riding in the front seat with him went down a 500 feet embankment. On the way down, the Marine that was riding in the passenger side was ejected and unfortunately was killed. The driver rode the vehicle all the way to the bottom and sustained some very serious injuries. By the time I was notified and could make my way out to where the scene of the accident was, the life flight helicopter had already come and gone, and the other Marine that had died, his body had been extracted. The fire trucks that had rolled to the scene and the squad cars of the military police were there remaining. When I arrived at the scene, the guys were standing by the rig and by the squad cars. I talked to the officer in charge, and I noticed as I looked at the squad cars to my right and the fire engines to my left that all eyes were on me. The guys didn't want to leave without some kind of word from me, the chaplain, the ambassador of God on the scene. Having commended the officer in charge for the good work that they had done, I turned to first the military police who were standing by their squad cars, gave them a thumbs up, and then a few yards away was the firefighters and gave them a thumbs up. They needed that word of encouragement and hope that just came from a thumbs up side, but it came from the chaplain, the ambassador of God, to give them a sense of hope and encouragement that it was okay for them to go on and go forward. When critical incidents occur, you never know just exact what kind of role you're going to have. In this instance, it was my taking the time to find them out on that windy road on Camp Pendleton and check on them to see how they were doing. Those Marines and those civilian firefighters wanted a thumbs up from God's ambassador before they moved on. And it was important that they have that. In another setting, as a chaplain, I was standing in my commanding officer's office when a phone call came. The news was tragic. One of our Marine officers' wives had just miscarried, and they were requesting help. Immediately, I was dispatched to the scene, and there at the hospital, as I entered, I noticed that in the birth area, the faces of the nurses were unusually pale, and as well as the commanding officer, who was very grateful that I had arrived because his young Marine and wife were inside a hospital room waiting for my arrival. And the nurse who was going by said to me, "I'll have the baby cleaned up and bring the baby in just as soon as I can." Her face was ashen, and I could tell that this news was very devastating. The young couple that I met were in tears and in a great state of shock. On that day, I had the opportunity to hear their cry of distress. It was a time in which they talked about how they had hoped for young Alan's arrival, and they were saddened at his death. We talked, and later, when the child was brought in, I provided an anointing for the child with oil, and we prayed. And as we turned about the plans for a funeral service, they also asked, "Chaplain, could we include our other 2 children?" In that moment, in that room, at that time, they had revealed that they had 2 other children who had not been memorialized, but had just been sort of forgotten in the process. I was thankful to God for the training that I had received and for having His sustaining grace in that moment, as their cry of distress became very great at that point in time. I was able to say, sure, we would be able to include the other children in the memorial service. Later, we did plan and execute a memorial service. The Marines were there in dress uniform. The entire battalion had turned out, and it brought great healing to this family. There's a time when you have the opportunity to speak with individuals, to hear their cry of distress one-on-one. And then later you can perform a function like a funeral service or memorial service that also continues to provide support and healing for them. The final illustration that I'd like to give you to summarize about how to connect with individuals comes in a time of a school shooting. In Southern California at a high school, Santana High School, a young 14-year-old came to school with a handgun. He entered into the boys' bathroom and he killed the first 2 boys that came in. Later, he would then shoot at any passers-by. Well, as you can imagine, this caused great pain, chaos, and confusion at the school. After the school had been evacuated and the police had started their investigation, it was determined that the next day we would have a crisis management brief. That was very helpful. The people were able to hear what exactly had happened, who it was that had been killed in the incident, who had been injured, and what their latest update was on their improvement. As I said, coming out of the formal group session, you have the opportunity to speak with people one-on-one. Unfortunately, I was not present to be there to address this mother and son, but I witnessed something tragic on TV that I would like to illustrate first how not to do and then how to do. The camera focused on a young man who was tears streaming down his face. They shoved a microphone in his face and said, "Son, how do you feel about this?" His response to the camera was, "Why did God let my friend die?" There was silence. Then the camera turned and focused on his mother just a couple paces behind. The reporter asked, "How do you feel about this, ma'am?" The lady had a red dot in her forehead, indicating that she was Hindu, and her response was this: "Well, we believe that the reason for this great tragedy was because of the sins, the terrible sins that were committed in past lifetimes." And again there was silence, and the mom and son had gone on. Well, as you can tell, the mother's comments did not connect to answer her son's or address her son's statement of spiritual distress. Had I been able to have been there, I would have loved to have made this comment to the son when he said, "Why did my friend have to die?" My comment to the young man would have been something like this: "I can see from the tears that are streaming down your face and the sadness in your eyes that you're just crushed at the loss of your good friend. Tell me, how long have you known one another?" In that simple statement, you have the opportunity to validate the cry of distress and to explore the significance of that relationship. Also, you could include the mom by getting her involved in the conversation and asking her if she knew how close they were together, how much the friendship of the two boys meant. Critical incident stress management provides a way for us to effectively minister to people who find themselves in a pit of destruction, whose sense of God has faded, and who are desperately crying out for hope. It's important in these times to study, to show yourself approved, handling accurately the Word of God. And by that, not just being able to quote a Bible verse, but to be able to be the ambassador who will, by God's grace, have the courage to step into the pit of destruction, to reach out and help put that person's feet upon a solid rock, and be God's representative to them, providing them a sense of hope and encouragement in times of darkness.